Hello, ELIC 30. This is Michael, and we are in How to Be Human, an Autistic Man's Guide to Life, continuing with Chapter 2, and we are now at the bottom of page 23. LW. How did you gain more control over your brain as you grew older? Jory. The difference back then was that autism was more in control of my brain, I guess. I didn't respond well to much of anything. But autism now is different from autism then for me. Suppress has such bad connotations in this instance, but it unfortunately is the closest word that would adequately convey the broad meaning of what autism is for me now. It's still very present because of the way my mind works and the way I think and respond to things. But I make a distinction between parts of autism that I have removed or that I actively remove, and the parts I don't. I don't really adequately understand how other people with autism handle it, but I've always had a sense that some folks seem to have a more evolutional or merged approach, and then other people may be more similar to me, and we have more of a precision removal or suppression-based approach. But the end result is obviously very similar, so there can't be that much difference. In some sense, perhaps my approach to autism is merely a better understanding of myself, since everything is happening within the same space up there. LW. When do you feel like you really became Jory? Understanding that Jory is still a work in progress, and you who are at age 55 will be different from now. When did you begin to have a sense of who you were? Jory. I think I have a pretty good idea. I think there's two parts of me that I came to know. The first part was who I am personality-wise. I suppose I learned that in high school. And then I found out what I'm interested in and what I want to do with myself, and got to know myself in that regard. Then I got to know myself in terms of how do I want other people to think about me, which is basically another way of saying how do I want to interact with people. I learned those two things in college. Both of those things I think are really important. To know yourself is a very gradual process, especially because as you grow older, that changes slightly. But overall, I think what helped me were points of comparison. Two things that I really liked doing when I was younger were reading and playing video games. Another would be nature, bird watching in particular. What all those things share is observing actors in another story. You were observing all those actors. And I guess the process of self-discovery would be that the way that my mind works, I build off of information. I wasn't interacting. I didn't like to interact with the people, to put it mildly, but I did have lots of points of comparison in terms of stories. Comparing myself to all these things, and to the people around me, of course, was particularly instructive. I discovered what my interests were through experience. That was really valuable. For methods of learning, experience is valuable. For more abstract things, experience is helpful, followed by visual stuff. I got to experience what I was interested in by taking 2 geography classes while I was still in high school, and also shadowing a geographer to see what his job was like. I got to experience what the whole geography thing was about, rather than reading the Wikipedia page. Besides my interests, I learned more about my values by doing service activities. I also learned more about how to interact with others by doing leadership programs and being involved with other students and organizations, by participating in a shared activity. I was involved in 2 programs. One was a reading program, and then one was the Marine Science Club. For both, we went out to local schools. The reading program, Cocky's Reading Express, was a partnership between student government and the mascot program. The University of South Carolina mascot, Cocky, would read to little kids and act out books. The kids loved Cocky. They were fun and asked good questions. I signed up for tons of trips on the Cocky teams, where I would help by surveying classrooms, handing out books, sometimes being a reader, and also helping new volunteers. I also had the education outreach coordinator position with the Marine Science Club for a couple of years. Doing these activities, I realized that I'm really driven by stuff that I want to see get better. I also recognize that I only have about 40 or 50 years to make a difference. The clock's ticking. And you have to think of it like the clock is ticking if you are involved in education, because you are passing down something to the next round of people who, in a weird way, will one day become you. Talking about disability. When Jory was selected as a Rhodes Scholar, he received national media attention. After an article appeared in the Wall Street Journal, one of the online commentators wrote, "Maybe Jory will find a cure for autism." I shared this quote as the framework for us to discuss Jory's thoughts on an autism cure, as well as the larger question of what it is like to be disabled in a world that increasingly values the mentally and physically able. Beyond that discussion hovers the larger philosophical question of what it is like to navigate a culture that actively tries to edit out what it perceives as imperfections. Consider the flawless images of Instagram, or the ability of programs such as Photoshop to erase the most minor physical blemishes. What does that do to our cultural acceptance of differences? In reply, Jory posed his own question. Is it ethical to remove autism, or is it unethical not to? Jory: I get confused when researchers try to find cures to autism. It's like, well, why? Nobody's ever said why. For someone like me, where I do face a lot of challenges as a result of not being able to order off the same menu as a neurotypical person, I still wouldn't choose to have a different menu after having lived with this one. I'm really appreciative for the way that I think. Even if I had new opportunities, I feel like I would lose as well. It's not a win or a win-win. It's a loss, and I wouldn't like the losses. Some of the benefits I wouldn't want to lose are not being able to be as easily influenced by emotion and my memory. There are other benefits like methods of thinking. I seem to have more visual thinking than other people, and that's a benefit. LW. What do you think about the concept of someone wanting to fix or edit out autism? Jory. This discussion is also part of a broad moral thought that doesn't necessarily apply just to autism. Potentially, in 10, 20 years, it could apply to a whole bunch of different things. With gene editing, for example, my concern is that we will ask first, but think later. Not practical thinking, but moral thinking or ethical thinking. Those elements are usually slower than technology. It takes time for philosophy to catch up with technological advancements. My concern is that with biological editing, we change something before we understand what consequences would be bad. Not just trying to edit out autism, but all sorts of other things also. It's a more interesting and nuanced question whether way in the future you could decide whether your kid had autism or not. Would it be ethical to have a child where there's nothing wrong with them, but they had more challenges because of how society is structured? I think that's an interesting question, because in my mind, you have to be very clear about the fact that having a disability is not a problem under certain definitions, and certainly people with all sorts of disabilities interact and contribute positively to society, whether they have autism or something else. But you also can't deny that having a disability means having additional challenges in life. It is a really weird question to think whether autism could be removed completely or whether it would be unethical not to remove it. Right now, there's a debate about whether to edit out, to kill, a bunch of mosquitoes that induce malaria by self-destructing an entire subspecies of mosquito. Scientists are conducting biotests with a fake ecosystem to see what happens. I think that'll be a good precursor because humans get much more complicated. With gene editing, you'd be eradicating a subspecies of humans. Not a subspecies biologically, but you'd be removing an aspect of the human experience. But for what benefit exactly? The benefit of removing malaria is very clear. But would removing autism actually benefit society? Should society change to recognize the benefits of autism instead of just the challenges? These kinds of questions need to be asked and thought about a lot. Certainly, my experience has been very challenging, and it has also been rewarding. And who knows, hopefully I'll be able to do something with my life that benefits other people in some way. What if that didn't happen? What if I didn't happen? I don't know. I don't know how to do that cost-benefit calculation, or whether you should even ever do a cost-benefit calculation on that kind of stuff. There will always be the really strong moral question. Is it unethical to not do anything when you have the capability of removing troubles? I'm more worried than anything else that the simpler moral arguments that are easier to understand will carry more weight and will end the discussion prematurely. I worry I worry that emotionally driven arguments will have more appeal than other arguments.
Hello, you've reached the A-Card residence. Please leave a message after the beep. Hi there, it's Steve Aisha.
Let's take that last paragraph again. There will always be the really strong moral question. Is it unethical to not do anything when you have the capability of removing troubles? I'm more worried than anything else that the simpler moral arguments that are easier to understand will carry more weight and will end the discussion prematurely. I worry that emotionally driven arguments will have more appeal than other arguments. I think it's really hard for neurotypical people to divorce decision-making from emotions and social fabric. And we'll stop this video for now, and we'll pick up the chapter in the next video.